Buenos días. Vamos a dar comienzo a la siguiente sesión plenaria. Hoy tenemos la suerte de que conozco, o sea que tenemos la suerte de tener con nosotros a la profesora María Joao Branco que forma parte, es integrante del grupo Nietzsche de Lisboa, profesora del Departamento de Filosofía de la Universidad de Lisboa. Estudió en esa misma universidad, también en la Universidad de Pisa, y ha trabajado extensamente en Nietzsche, Kant y la estética. Sus líneas de investigación son filosofía moderna y contemporánea, estética, particularmente Kant y Nietzsche. Es miembro cofundadora del Nietzsche International Lab, miembro del Seminario Permanente Nietzscheano, Centro Interdepartamentale Coni Montinari di Studi su Nietzsche y la cultura europea, Universidad de Pisa, Lecce, Padova, Firenze, del GIR, Grupo Internacional de Investigaciones sobre Nietzsche y del Hipernietzsche. Ha coeditado varios volúmenes sobre Nietzsche, ha publicado en Portugal, Alemania, Francia, Italia, Brasil o España. Algunos de sus últimos libros como coeditora son Nietzsche on Instinct and Language, As the Spider Spins, ensayo sobre la crítica y el uso del lenguaje en Nietzsche, Sujeito, Decadence e Arte, Nietzsche e a Modernidade, Nietzsche y el problema de la subjetividad, Nietzsche y Kant sobre estética y antropología. Su conferencia de hoy lleva el título de Nietzsche's Melody. Entonces, cuando quieras, María Joao.
Muchas gracias, Mariano. Buenas tardes. Me gustaría empezar agradeciendo mucho el convite tan amable para participar en el primer congreso de esta recién nacida red iberoamericana de escritores nietzscheanos, a la cual deseo desde ya una vida longa y feliz. A pedido de los organizadores, voy a hablar en inglés, esperando que todos entiendan esta lengua tan poco iberoamericana. So, I will turn to English. Good afternoon. It is for me a great honor to be here today. As the title of my talk indicates, I will speak about Nietzsche's relation to music, a subject that I think was already addressed yesterday in our Congress. Indeed, Nietzsche's long-standing devotion to music is widely known. He famously wrote that without music, life would be an error, that music frees the spirit, that music even fosters the pathos of philosophy. It can certainly be said that Nietzsche's musicophilia derived from his deep personal inclination for this art, and that his musical education allowed him not only to appreciate, but also to play and even to compose music. In addition, as is well documented, he had a profound knowledge of the history of Western music, which is attested by several texts devoted to the work of the most important Western composers. All these facts are by now sufficiently established, as sufficiently as it is made Nietzsche's famous and controversial relation with the composer Richard Wagner. And the same facts justify the idea that the privilege of music in Nietzsche's life and work has, of course, very important biographic reasons that cannot be ignored when it comes to understanding the place of his art in his work. But my aim today is to clarify the philosophical grounds of the value that Nietzsche gives to music. For if the importance of music in his life raises no doubt and has been widely studied, its philosophical value still deserves attention and clarification. It deserves, in particular, and maybe in the first place, a philosophic and historical clarification that I wish to bring about today. More precisely, my aim is to show that however deeply personal, Nietzsche's views on music are in line with the modern historic and philosophical context that determined what I would like to call today a musical turn in modern philosophy. So I shall argue that to include Nietzsche in this modern musical turn helps to shed light on important philosophical concerns shared by an involuntary fellowship of modern philosophers who were unanimous in their praise of the philosophical value of music, in spite of the differences of their philosophical views. This musical brotherhood can be traced back to Jean-Jacques Rousseau, and it includes thinkers as impossible to reconcile as Hegel, Schopenhauer, or Kierkegaard, as well as philosophers historically closer to us, like Wittgenstein, for example, or Theodor Adorno. I shall not, of course, address here the views of every one of them on music. Instead, I propose to highlight two main philosophical problems that determine the unprecedented interest of philosophy in the art of music in modernity, namely the problem of language and the problem of subjectivity. By doing so, I hope to show that the modern turn to music in philosophy is not reducible to a particular set of merely aesthetical questions, and that it rather expresses the concern with a much wider order of philosophical problems. Hence, I shall start by arguing that Nietzsche's philosophic interest in music is not a mere Nietzschean idiosyncrasy, but rather, and to an important extent, a consequence of the modernity of his thinking. In order to support this claim, I shall start by providing a brief account of the modern philosophical debate about the essence or nature of music that entails a discussion about the already mentioned topics of language and subjectivity. I shall do this recalling Schopenhauer and Hanslick's opposite views on music that set the frame for understanding Nietzsche's positions, especially his criticism of what he calls philosophical idealism in and of its consequences for the understanding of the relation of music and philosophy. I shall then briefly explore Nietzsche's criticisms to Wagner and finally turn to the topic that is announced in the title of my paper, that is, Nietzsche's praise of melodies and of melodic music, in order to elucidate how the problems of language and subjectivity play a distinctive role in Nietzsche's views on music. So, let me start by the historical philosophical context, the turn to music. In its broadest sense and significance, the historical context I wish to account for, briefly, is the context of the modern crisis of Western culture and Western tradition that Nietzsche's philosophy never ceases to address, and that can be described as the modern crisis of meaning. To the profound questioning that it implied, belonged also a profound debate about the essence or nature of music that has been object of recent and important research. This debate, whose origins can probably be, on the one hand, traced back to Rousseau's philosophy, and on the other, to Mozart, or even Monteverdi's musical compositions, this debate eventually achieved the form of the dispute for and against what received the name of absolute music, a concept created by one of its most notorious opponents, the composer Richard Wagner. Absolute music was the name given by Wagner to purely instrumental music whose golden age preceded Wagner's epoch. Contrary to opera or church music, for example, that is to say, contrary to music composed to be played and sung, composers like Haydn, Mozart, or Beethoven started to write music exclusively for instruments, that is to say, music without words, texts, or songs, as in the case of symphonies or instrumental chamber music. As these instrumental works become more and more important, they start to legitimate the conception of music as an autonomous art, an art absolutely independent from extra musical contents, with a meaning or a truth of its own, solely expressed by means of music's constitutive musical elements. This conception of music as an autonomous art, with an independent existence and meaning, was of course in line with the wider philosophical understanding of art and of the arts in modernity that gave rise to the newborn realm of aesthetics. The novelty about conceiving art's aesthetic autonomy or freedom from non-aesthetic meanings and contents, religious, political, social, and others, consisted in ascribing to artists and to works of art a whole new dignity, indeed an emancipation from other forms of human activity and expression. Music was not an exception within this new conception of art, and both for modern philosophers and for modern composers, instrumental or absolute music came to be considered precisely as a manifestation of music's freedom from extra musical meanings, concepts, ideas, or projects, and hence as an expression of music's true essence. That music was absolute meant thus that its creation and its existence were independent or free from extra-musical purposes or functions, that music no longer served as a means to extra-musical ends, that music had a value of its own, that it was worth in and by itself, independently from any relation to other realities. Philosophically, as is very well known, this conception of music received its utmost essentialist formulation in Schopenhauer's famous Metaphysics of Music. According to Schopenhauer, music was a direct expression of the will, that is to say, an immediate expression of metaphysical reality that no empirical representation could fully convey. As such, Schopenhauer wrote, and I quote, "Music bypasses ideas, is quite independent of the phenomenal world, positively ignores it, and could still exist even if there were no world at all, which cannot be said of the other arts." End quote. However, and to a certain extent paradoxically, music's emancipation from the world of representation, music's liberation from extra-musical realms and meanings, also aroused a radically non-metaphysical conception of this art. This latter was formulated by the musicologist Edward Hanslick, who famously argued in his essay on the musically beautiful that the content in music is nothing but tonally animated forms, based on elements of melody, harmony, rhythm, and timbre. Hanslick hence opposed the formalist view of music to the essentialism of Schopenhauer. Although acknowledging the existence of a content in music, and especially in instrumental music, he rejected the idea that this content was metaphysical, arguing that it was a purely musical one. For Hanslick, therefore, musical forms were music's content, and the ideas that the composer expresses in music were purely musical ideas. However, although opposed, Schopenhauer and Hanslick's views on music addressed the same problem, namely, the problem of knowing whether music expresses or means something other than itself. That is to say, the problem of clarifying whether it makes sense to say that music expresses more than what is contained in the sounding forms that constitute a musical piece. It was this problem that set the grounds for the appearance of the concept of absolute music, a problem that confronted composers, musicologists, and philosophers with the questions about the meaning of musical forms, about what is musical meaning, or about what does music mean, if it means anything at all. These questions are still present in Nietzsche's remarks on music, and they put forth the typically modern articulation of the problem of meaning with the privileged topics of modern philosophical reflection already mentioned, that is to say, language and subjectivity. But this articulation was already present in the contrasting views of Schopenhauer and Hanslick, as I will try to make clear before proceeding to clarify the terms in which it appears in Nietzsche. I shall start with language. One of the conclusions of Schopenhauer's Metaphysics of Music is that among the arts, music is the only one that says or speaks immediately the essence of the world. For Schopenhauer, this means that music is not an empirically conditioned representation of the will, but a direct expression of the will that dispenses with representative mediations, namely with linguistic mediations. More precisely, music says or immediately expresses what words and concepts cannot say. It expresses the essence of the world, of reality, which no linguistic mediation can convey, by means of purely music, non-linguistic elements. In Schopenhauer's words, and I quote, "If music tries to stick too closely to the words and to mold itself to the events, it is endeavoring to speak a language not of its own." Hence, because music is not linguistic, it expresses or says the will. But precisely because music says the will, Schopenhauer conceives it as being a language, and a language that speaks its own language, that is to say, a purely expressive language capable of conveying what words cannot. The problem of the meaning of music implies thus in Schopenhauer the growing modern philosophic suspicion about language's ability to convey meaning, a suspicion that Nietzsche will radicalize or dramatize, as it is well known. By considering that words and concepts belong to the phenomenal world of representation and not to the nominal world of the will, Schopenhauer is thus in line with the modern idea that language is a limited human creation and consists of a plurality of arbitrary conventions subject to historical and circumstantial changes. Indeed, the adequacy of words to express supra or extra historical national geographic truth and meaning becomes less and less evident in modern philosophy, as well as language alleged reliability to provide knowledge about how and what things are. Consequently, several modern philosophers came to consider linguistic or conceptual discourse as a medium that rather prevented than enabled an immediate or direct access to essentially meaningful realities, to essential non-arbitrary or conventional meaning. It is in this context that philosophers like Schopenhauer turned to music and to the possibility that this art could provide a solution for the problem of conveying meanings that are not linguistically reachable or translatable. Music gains, therefore, an unprecedented expressive and even cognitive value, a value that is grounded on music's alinguistic nature, especially in the case of instrumental music. At the same time, and quite surprisingly, as already pointed out, it is precisely because music is not a language or because music lacks language that it seems to articulate a meaning that verbal or conceptual language cannot attain. In addition to this, and perhaps even more surprisingly or paradoxically, music's non-linguistic nature brings about the idea formulated by Schopenhauer that music is a universal language, a language that can be understood by every human community and that is meaningful for any human individual. For Schopenhauer, this universality is in part a consequence of music's irreducibility to any other language. Music is an immediate expression of the will, or of the essence of the world, and for this reason it cannot be mediated, it cannot be translated. The case of instrumental music is again exemplary of this understanding. Lacking spoken or written words, instrumental music not only expresses what words cannot say, but it also manifests or shows a meaning that cannot be translated or substituted by any linguistic formulation. Music's non-translatability was hence, within Schopenhauer's views on music, a consequence of the idea that music is quite independent of the phenomenal world, that music positively ignores the world, indeed that music could still exist even if there were no world at all. However, the same impossibility of translation is acknowledged by Hans Lick, formalist views on music, although with a different consequence as regards the universality claimed by Schopenhauer. The problem of meaning also remains crucial for Hans Lick, for whom music's realm was, I quote, truly not of this world. He writes, "We cannot say what music means. In music there is both meaning and logical sequence, but in a musical sense. It is language we speak and understand, but which we are unable to translate." End quote. So while insisting almost in Schopenhauerian terms that music is not of this world, Hans Lick nevertheless rejected the metaphysical understanding of music as well as the universality that Schopenhauer argued for. Hence, as already pointed out, for Schopenhauer, music is a universal language because of its expressive immediacy. This means that for Schopenhauer, music immediately expresses meaning, and that in music, meaning is immediately understood because it is, as it were, felt. Even more precisely, contrary to words and concepts, music makes us feel the meaning of the world, of the will, of our lives, of ourselves, and it is universal because it is a language of feelings that everybody understands and that cannot be translated into words. Schopenhauer grounds thus the universality of music in music's ability of directly or immediately expressing feelings or emotions and expressing them not in their particularity, but, as he writes, in their quintessence. This point, of course, is rejected by Hanslick because for Hanslick, music's meaning or content was completely independent from the emotional effects it has on us. As already seen, his musical formalism totally opposes the idea that the meaning or the content of musical compositions is extra-musical. Faithful to the project of defending the aesthetic autonomy of music, Hanslick hence contests the idea that music communicates feelings, that it expresses emotions, rather insisting in music's purely formal, objective properties. For these reasons, Hanslick formalism is an objectivism. And in valuing music's objectivity, rather than our subjective responses to this art, he goes to the point of arguing that, as well as the other arts, music demands to be understood only by itself, through knowledge of its unique technical characteristics. The formalist rejection of the Schopenhauerian views on music amounts, therefore, to a technical or scientific view of this art. Furthermore, this view privileges knowledge of music's objective musical elements or forms and totally dispenses with any consideration of music's emotional, subjective impact on its listeners. So, if in Schopenhauer's understanding of the immediate expressivity of music, we can identify the modern philosophical suspicion about the adequacy of language to meaning, in Hanslick's objectivism, we can in turn identify the modern problematization of subjectivity, indeed, the modern malaise about what concerns the living subject, living and feeling subject. As is well known, modernity inaugurated a new conception of individual subjectivity, understood as the subject's deep awareness of his separation from a cosmic whole, of his independence from a divine model, of his difference from the mere facts and objects that compose the external world. In other words, in modern times and for modern philosophy, subjectivity becomes the sphere or the realm that comes about from the contrast felt between the subject's inner world or inner life and external reality. Descartes was famously the introducer of a conception of subjectivity as a metaphysical domain where the subject becomes completely transparent for itself and detached from the world in which he lives. According to Descartes, introspection guarantees epistemological certainty, and it presupposes that the subject is capable of somehow withdrawing from the external world in order to achieve a state of self-consciousness independent from his physical or bodily existence. The Cartesian ego cogito is hence an unextensive metaphysical reality distinguished from res extensa, self-sufficient and immediately self-conscious, fundamentally characterized by the capacity to think. But however philosophical, powerful and influential, Descartes' view on subjectivity were not completely adequate to modern subjective experience. Indeed, if it is true that the experience of modern subjects is one of their individual separation from the totality of the external world of facts, the divine world or the merely empirical one, at the same time, it is also the experience of the discovery of a realm that is by no means clearly defined, transparent and independent from what goes on outside the subject. Indeed, the modern experience of subjectivity is also the experience of a not totally clear domain, composed by indistinct and unconscious aspects, subject to change and to external influences. For this reason, to modern self-awareness also belongs the consciousness that the borders of the inside and the outside world are never completely defined, and that subjective existence entails or even corresponds to a ceaseless exploration of the subject's fears, desires, anxieties, and so on. As a consequence, more than introspective knowledge of a substantial identity, subjectivity comes to be understood as the life of the subject. That is to say, as the experience that the subject has of himself as an unstable entity, sometimes surprising, sometimes deceiving, subject to change and difficult to grasp, which is certainly irreducible to a description of facts, and to its own conceptualization. Hence, if modern understanding of subjectivity sets the grounds for the problem of subjective autodetermination or subjective autonomy, as well as for the defense of individual freedom and emancipation from external powers and realms, at the same time, it implies the necessity of exploring and dealing with the sense of being isolated or enclosed within an individual uniqueness that is difficult to express and difficult to share with others, difficult to communicate. And here again, as it happens with language, music seems to serve exemplarily this exploration, that is to say, the difficult relation of modern subjects with themselves and with other subjects. Much has been written about the connection of modern philosophy's turn to music and its relationship with the modern philosophical conception of subjectivity. One of the motives for the unprecedented attention that philosophers paid to music in modernity was the growing conviction that, contrary to the other arts, music expressed the invisible and dynamic reality of subjective experiences and processes. Music appeared thus as the only art that gives access to the subject's inner world, or inner truth, to the same truth that he seems to be at pains to find in the different domains of modern existence, and that modernity somehow seems to have widened or expanded, enhancing its resistance to be identified, objectified, determined, communicated. In this context, and Hansley's subjective views notwithstanding, the defense of music's aesthetic autonomy contributed to establish the idea that music was the only adequate expression of subjective life, that is to say, of subjective and invisible experiences such as feeling, thinking, or willing. Listening to and composing music, especially pure instrumental music, came hence to be conceived of as the experience of the encounter of the listener or the composer with an otherwise concealed or inapparent reality, or with an intimate truth, an encounter that somehow seemed to fulfill the modern quest for meaning and to present the complex relation between the I and the world, as well as between the I and himself. This subjective truth or meaning, however, was not an identity, a determinate content, the subject's essence or ultimate reality, as in the Cartesian ego. The meaning at stake was rather conceived of as an endless discovery or self-discovery, composed by dynamic movements such as desire, reflection, doubt, expectation, and the like. Such dynamics seems to suit very adequately the subject's experience and relation to and with himself, an experience and a relation of which instrumental music became an exemplary expression, as in Beethoven's symphonies, Mozart's sonatas, and so on. Put differently, in modernity, music becomes the language as much as the experience of subjectivity, and this means that music not only speaks to and of the subject, but that it also, as it were, thinks, expects, recalls, and even listens to itself. And this idea, of which melodies and our experience of hearing melodies seem to be a perfect example, leads me finally to Nietzsche and to Nietzsche's understanding of music and of its relation with philosophy in modern times. Nietzsche addresses this relation in an intriguing section of the Gay Science entitled Why We Are Not Idealists. The text is there. He writes, and I'm going to read, "Formerly, philosophers feared the senses. Have we perhaps unlearned this fear all too much? Today we are all sensualists, we philosophers of the present and the future, not in theory, but in praxis, The former, however, saw the senses as trying to lure them away from their world, from the cool kingdom of ideas, to a dangerous southern island where they feared their philosophers' virtues would melt away like snow in the sun. Walks in the year was virtually a condition of philosophizing. A true philosopher didn't listen to life anymore insofar as life is music. He denied the music of life. It is an old philosopher's superstition that all music is siren music. Today, we are inclined to make the opposite judgment, which could itself be just as mistaken, namely that ideas are worse seductresses than the senses, for all their cold anemic appearance, and not even despite that appearance. They always lift off the blood of the philosopher. They always drained his senses, and even, if you believe it, his heart. Don't you see the spectacle unfolding, this steady growing tyranny, this ever more ideally construed desensualization? In sum, all philosophical idealism until now was something like an illness, except where, as in Plato's case, it was the caution of an overabundant and dangerous health. The fear of overpowerful senses, the shrewdness of a shrewd Socratic. Maybe we moderns are not healthy enough to need Plato's idealism, and we don't fear the senses because Nietzsche does not finish the last sentence. However, he seems to indicate that the reason why modern philosophers no longer fear the senses lies less in their courage than in their lack of health and vitality. The text abounds with references to life, and its central notion seems to be contained in the enigmatic expression, the music of life. To understand this latter, it is important to recall that the whole passage is meant to clarify its title, that is to say, to explain why those to whom Nietzsche calls we are not idealists or are no longer idealists. In the text, idealism is equated with fear of the senses and of the seductive power of sensibility that attracted idealists such as Plato to a dangerous and warm southern island away from the cold kingdom of ideas. Idealism is no longer possible, Nietzsche suggests here, because modern philosophers no longer conceive their senses as being dangerous, that is to say, as being so strong or powerful that had to be denied or cooled down by philosophical idealization, that is to say, by the philosophical work or effort of abstracting and conceptualizing. Nietzsche illustrates the situation by referring to the mythical figures of the sirens and to the mythical power of their music that was feared by the ancients. And Nietzsche's idea is that, contrary to Odysseus, modern philosophers no longer feel the need to protect themselves from the music of life. His suggestion is less that philosophers learn how to deal with that music than that they simply became incapable of hearing it. In other words, Nietzsche is not pointing to something like an Odysseus-like courage that would be specific of modern philosophers, but rather to the weakness of their senses and of their ears in particular. So what seems to be at stake here is their incapacity of hearing, their deafness to something that has not yet received an idealized configuration, that is to say, to what hasn't yet been controlled by knowledge, by concepts, by language. The music of life stands in this text exactly for the sensitive or sensual reality that resists to be controlled by rationality, that is irreducible to conceptual formulations, that cannot, as it were, be exhausted by words. Life is music, Nietzsche writes here, precisely in this sense. But that life, as well as music, are irreducible to linguistic formulations, be they philosophic or not, does not mean that they prevent us from hearing, thinking, and, of course, talking about them. It rather means that they are what is there to hear, to think, and to talk about, and that this always exceeds what we have already thought, what we have already said. This very idea is also expressed by Nietzsche in a fragment from 81, where he wrote, "We cannot say how many things have not yet found a word and a thought. This is what our music proves, and not that there is no thought and no word to be found for that." So life is music as long as life seduces us and our ears. But according to the text about the sirens, Nietzsche thinks that modern philosophy is becoming less and less capable or interested in being seduced by the music of life. And Nietzsche's word for this process seems to be desensualization. This term, desensualization, also appears in section 217 of Human Not to Human, a text where Nietzsche describes not the history of philosophy, but the history of Western music as a process precisely of desensualization. He there argues that, as a result of the evolution of modern music, I quote, our ears have grown more and more intellectualized, so that they inquire after the reason, the meaning, and are no longer content to know that a thing is. Hence, the consequence of this tendency of asking for the meaning of musical sounds, that is to say, of asking about the concepts or ideas that are being expressed by those sounds, is a bluntness of ears, such that, Nietzsche goes on claiming, they can no longer hear the subtle distinction between, for example, C sharp and D flat. The problem that seems thus to be that what Huxley considered to be the purely musical or formal access to music is lost. And the proof is that we can no longer hear or recognize what is not yet conceptually determined or idealized, the music of life that resists to linguistic formulations and that no longer seduces modern philosophers, because our ears have become deaf to the sheer musicality of sounds. It is as if we moderns, and particularly we modern philosophers, seduced as we are by the power of ideas, suffer from the results of something like an over-conceptualization of reality, and particularly of sensuous reality. As far as music is concerned, the result of desensualization is an intellectualization of our sense of hearing and of the experience of musical sensations, symptomatic of an impoverishment that prevents our sensibility and our intellect from complementing each other and from collaborating during the experience of listening to music. So Nietzsche's criticisms of the progressive desensualization throughout the history of music and of the intellectualization of hearing apparently support musical compositions that are completely deprived from conceptual meaning or from meaning that can be linguistically formulated and that rejects extra musical contents, to use Huxley's expression. However, this is not at all the case, as his presentation of absolute music in Universidade 215 makes clear. There Nietzsche claims that absolute music corresponds not to a musical innovation, but, I quote, to a primitive stage of music in which sounds gave pleasure as such. Such stage disappeared a long time ago, Nietzsche claims, and today we cannot but listen symbolically to music, because musical forms became entirely enmeshed on threads of feelings and concepts. In Nietzsche's words, if our intellect introduced significance into sounds so that we cannot hear pure sounds anymore, the truth is, and I quote, that only men who have remained behind in the evolution of music would be capable of understanding it in a purely formalistic way. Hence, what our ears give us access to are meanings, ideas, extra musical contents that somehow function as conceptual or intellectual walks in the ear, even when we listen to pure instrumental music. Nietzsche's critique of the intellectualization of the senses thus corresponds not to a defense of musical formalism, autonomy, or absolute independence from extra musical meanings, but rather to a rejection of the tendency to subordinate sensible meaning to rational meaning. As far as music is concerned, such tendency corresponds to subordinating the sense of hearing to non-musical meanings, especially to metaphysical meanings, as was the case both in Schopenhauer's philosophy of music and, of course, in Wagner's musical works. But if Nietzsche criticizes the subordination of the senses to the intellect, it does not necessarily follow from this that he argues for the opposite tendency. Nietzsche was as much critical of the subordination of sensations to intellectual meaning as he was of the opposite tendency, that is to say, of the tendency to subordinate intellectual meaning to sensations. If he identified the weakening of sensibility by means of the primacy given to the intellect, he was equally suspicious of a weakening of the power of rationality by means of an excessive stimulation of the senses. Thus, both the weakening of the senses and the weakening of the intellect were the danger Nietzsche feared in the music of his time, especially in Wagner's music. Nevertheless, he didn't put wax in his ears and was, for a period of time, seduced indeed, as he writes, up to sickness by the powerful music of that siren named Wagner. But eventually, of course, Nietzsche understood that the tendency to introduce extra musical content in music pervaded Wagner's music. Through the mythological and symbolic dimensions that prevail in his compositions, Wagner gave an extra musical meaning to his music and so gave primacy to the significance of what is being heard over the question of what is there to hear. That is to say, he intellectualized the sense of hearing. He therefore completed this desensualization of the musical component of music by conceding an excess of significance to musical sounds. In Nietzsche's words, by making use of great symbols, Wagner created the impression that music was more meaningful than just music, infinitely more meaningful. But on the other hand, and at the same time that it intellectualizes our ears, Wagner's music also does the opposite, namely, it stimulates them until the limits of their capacity to listen. Indeed, exposed to so much noise, to the Wagnerian Sursum, boom boom, our ears become deaf, deprived of their capacity to hear, Nietzsche claims. Wagner's music formal effect is thus, and paradoxically, anesthesia. By conquering the nerves, this music acts as a narcotic, thus neutralizing the very capacity to hear. What is at stake is a music that enfeebles both the sensibility and the intellect of those who hear it, because the massive burden of effects that characterize Wagner's music hinders the senses as well as the thoughts. Hence, besides promoting the intellectualization of the senses, it also suppresses the capacity to think. As Nietzsche writes, Wagner's music leads the senses to their exhaustion and demands from the listener only one thing, I quote, above all, no thought. Hence, with Wagner, the historical tendency to the intellectualization of the senses reaches a point where music becomes a negation of the experience of listening to music. Wagner's music is thus a negation of itself as music because it denies the very possibility of listening to it. Put differently, Wagner's music tyrannizes both body and spirit, senses and reason, and it obstructs the exercise of freedom, which for Nietzsche music can and should promote. In contrast to this, Nietzsche writes about an affirmative music as one that, in his famous words, makes the spirit free and fosters the pathos of philosophy. Such music would address the senses as well as the capacity of generating thoughts that emerge from our being affected by sounds. And in Nietzsche's view, this means affirming or counting on participation of the subject listener, indeed, counting on the subject's freedom. Therefore, he asks in the case of Wagner, has anyone noticed that music makes the spirit free, gives wings to thought, that you become more of a philosopher, the more of a musician you become? End quote. This freedom of the spirit, the possibility of giving wings to thoughts, brings us back to the aforementioned topic of subjectivity. The question would then be, what kind of music makes the spirit free? What kind of music brings about an in equal measure, a sensitive as well as an intellectual response, that is to say, a subjective response not determined by intellectual concepts or general and therefore extra or supra-individual formula, a response that could constitute what Nietzsche names the pathos of philosophy. Instead of answering to these questions by trying to justify Nietzsche's choice of Georges Bizet's Carmen against Wagner's music, I shall try to do it by saying something about what the title of my paper announces, that is to say, about Nietzsche's taste for melodies and melodic music. So my claim is that to address the difficult and extensive discussion of the topic of subjectivity in Nietzsche's philosophy and the way Nietzsche deals with it in his reflections on music, it is useful to consider what he writes about melodies and about our experience of hearing melodies in several passages of his work. I wish only to focus in a particular passage that I will show you. But there are many texts where Nietzsche speaks of melodies or writes about melodies. And to analyze Nietzsche's description of this experience of hearing melodies, it is useful to clarify one important aspect of melodies to which Nietzsche's views on subjectivity particularly draw attention to, and to which I shall call their temporal dimension. This aspect becomes clearer when contrasted with Nietzsche's criticisms of Wagner's endless melody, to which a long section of Human Autumn Human is dedicated. This section is titled How Modern Music is Supposed to Make the Soul Move. And there Nietzsche argues that Wagner's endless melodies imply an absence of limits or of measure that makes them a potentially infinite sonorous continuum into which the listener is immersed. In this immersion, Nietzsche writes, the listener is forced to swim and to float as if he were in a liquid element where he felt in constant risk of drowning. As a result of their lack of limits, endless melodies therefore deprive the subject of what Nietzsche calls his self-possession because he simply feels lost. In particular, Nietzsche adds, endless melodies entail the experience of the absence of time, and thus the impossibility to recognize change, to recognize discontinuities, different heterogeneous moments, as for example, the moment of the beginning and that of ending. The experience of time is indeed the experience of change, and of the possibility of being, as it were, interrupted, and hence not the atemporal experience of infinite duration that is at stake in Wagner's endless melodies. But if this is so, then it is legitimate to ask whether Wagner's melodies are melodies at all. One's melodies, as we all know, are limited in time and foster an experience of time that is the exact opposite of the homogeneous continuity deprived of temporal limits and deprived of change that, according to Nietzsche, denies the subject the feeling of his self-possession. What is constitutive of melodies is precisely the fact that they interrupt, that they break a certain continuity, emphasizing a concrete set of moments and the quality of those moments. Melodies distinguish themselves within a sonorous whole, and of course, they end because they pass. Melodies, we can perhaps say, do not put us out of time. They rather make tangible the passage of time and not its endlessness. And by doing so, they make us sensible to the change that this passage entails, and do that in a way where change becomes, as it were, meaningful. Even better said, listening to melodies implies a willingness to engage with the passage of time, and with ourselves as time that passes, with ourselves with change, that is to say, as something that is not homogeneous and always identical, but unpredictable, subject to variations, and that in this sense asks for understanding, seducing our ears and minds for searching its meaning. My claim is that Nietzsche's love of melodies is related to this effort of making time, that all too human time to which we call human life, to the effort of making time and life meaningful. By meaningful, I don't mean absolutely intelligible, absolutely translatable into conceptual or philosophical formulations. I mean meaningful in the sense that this time, the human time of our lives, becomes a problem with which we wish to deal, a problem that seduces us without providing its own solution, and about which we nevertheless feel it is worth investigating and caring in spite of its constitutive resistance to provide answers. If, as Nietzsche famously wrote, without music life would be an error, it is precisely because music, and melodies in particular, engage us in the pleasant and difficult effort of making sense of the passage of time, of making change meaningful. Another way to put this is to say, as Nietzsche also wrote, that music fosters or can foster the pathos of philosophy. This does not mean, of course, that music teaches us philosophical theories or that we can be instructed by music. It means rather that by speaking to us without words, and most of the times by speaking without words about ourselves, music brings up our desire to be involved with what we feel we ignore, that it fosters the pathos or the wish to learn without ever being satisfied. This pathos or desire, however, is not something immediate, something merely natural. According to Nietzsche, it is something that must be acquired or something that must be learned, and that therefore demands time and demands practice. It demands, Nietzsche argues, to be practiced with what he calls patience and goodwill. In section 334 of the day Science, Nietzsche calls this pathos love, and compares the process of learning to love to the one involved in our relation with melodies. And to conclude, I would like to read this passage to you. The title is One Must Learn to Love. He says, this happens to us in music. First, one must learn to hear a figure and a melody at all, to detect and distinguish it, to isolate and delimit it as a life in itself. Then one needs effort and goodwill to stand it despite its strangeness, patience with its appearance and expression, and kind-heartedness about its oddity. Finally comes a moment when we are used to it, when we expect it, when we sense that we'd miss it if it were missing. And now it continues, relentless to compel and enchant us, until we have become its humble and enraptured lovers, who no longer want anything better from the world than it and it again. But this happens to us not only in music. It is in just this way that we have learned to love everything we love now. We are always rewarded in the end for our goodwill, our patience, our fair-mindedness and gentleness with what is strange, as it gradually casts off its veil and presents itself as a new and indescribable beauty. That is its thanks for our hospitality. Even he who loves himself will have learned it this way. There is no other way. Love too must be learned. Gracias.